you to the Natural History Museum for inviting Micaela and I to give a talk today. I'm going to share my slides. And I'll just start by asking that you're all seeing my slides now just before I begin. Okay, awesome. All right, so today we are going to be talking about two of the probably lesser seen species in Humboldt. So the Humboldt's flying squirrel and the coastal marten. And as I mentioned, I'm going to be giving this presentation with Micaela. I'm going to start things off talking about the Humboldt's flying squirrel, and then Micaela will continue talking about the coastal martens. So I'd like to begin this talk importantly with a land acknowledgement. Cal Poly Humboldt is in Arcata, which is located on the present and ancestral homeland of the unceded territory of the Wiyot tribe. Other tribes in Humboldt include Hupa, Karuk, Matol, Taloa, Waleki, and Yurok. And I'd encourage you to learn more about whose land you're on by visiting this website, which gives you maps similar to this one showing you the western coast of Northern California, and you can see which tribes occur in that area. So if you've been out in the redwood forests here in Humboldt County, you've probably seen some really amazing wildlife. We're very fortunate to have many different wildlife species that we can see in the redwood forest, as well as other habitats in Humboldt. And some of these wildlife species are probably more visible than others. So if you're out and about, you've probably maybe heard or saw some corvid species, such as this raven or Steller's jay. If you drove up to Oric, you might be able to see some elk, maybe even from your car. And some other species you probably have stumbled upon while walking in the redwood forest might be some banana slugs or some different salamander species. But there are other species that you might not see that often, and that might include the marbled murrelet or the northern spotted owl. You probably wouldn't see a bear. You might see a bear in your neighborhood going through the trash, but maybe not so much when you're out in the forest walking about. But two other species that most likely you haven't seen when you're out in the redwood forests are the Humboldt's flying squirrel and the coastal marten. And so Micaela and I are going to share some of our research that we've done on these species, which have involved students at Cal Poly Humboldt, both undergraduates and graduate students. So starting with the Humboldt's flying squirrel, this species is actually recently been discovered. And it's not that we didn't know that we had flying squirrels in Humboldt County, but rather that we didn't know that they were a different species. So if we take a look at this map here, it shows the three different species of flying squirrels in North America. And there's the southern flying squirrel, the northern flying squirrel, and now the newly named Humboldt's flying squirrels. So previously, researchers thought that the Humboldt's flying squirrel occurring in California, Oregon, and Washington were part of the northern flying squirrel. But it wasn't until Arbogast and colleagues, including Nick Krahulis, who's also in the Department of Wildlife, found out through genetic work that it's actually a distinct species. And not only that, that is a distinct species from the northern flying squirrel, but that the northern flying squirrel and the southern flying squirrel are actually more closely related than the Humboldt's flying squirrel is to the northern flying squirrel. So it's very different. It's been separated for many thousands of years. And so upon this discovery, and this paper came out in 2017, myself and students were interested in learning more about the species, especially since going from a very wide-ranging species, because we previously thought it was part of the northern flying squirrel, it's gone to having much more limited range. So we're interested in learning about how we can observe these and study these species, as well as more about their biology, and to understand if they need to be considered as a species of conservation concern. I also want to point out, you probably have to squint to see this, but there's also a very isolated population of Humboldt's flying squirrels in San Bernardino County, which are likely a species that should be studied further because of their isolation, and it's a very small population as well. So before I get into what research my students and I have been doing, I wanted to talk a little bit about the unique morphology and behavior of flying squirrels. So unlike most squirrel species, they are nocturnal, and so they are most active at night. And you might notice that they have rather large eyes, which are probably adapted to seeing in the dark. And they also, of course, because of their name, have this unique way of getting around. So the word flying in the name flying squirrel is a little misleading because they don't actually fly. They're not like a bat. They don't flap their wings. They actually use this extra skin attached to their arms and legs called the patagium, which allows them to glide from tree to tree as they move through the environment. So it gives the illusion of flying, but it's actually just gliding through the forest. They also have an interesting diet. You might think that they spend a lot of time up in the trees since they are flying, they're gliding from tree to tree, but they actually do most of their foraging on the ground, and they specialize on eating fungi, such as these truffles here. And so they also eat other things such as berries and seeds, but they're a pretty important species in a forest ecosystem because they spread the mycorrhizae around of the fungi, and so help with the forest health in doing so. They also have what I'm going to call some very ultra characteristics about them. And the first one, their first ultra characteristic, is that they glow in the ultraviolet. And so this was something that was stumbled upon by some researchers that were studying insects in a forest. And they were using black lights to be able to detect a species of insects. And the researchers were out doing their work, and they saw this sort of pinkish purplish thing glide by, and they realized that it was a flying squirrel. And so they did some research on study skins, and indeed they found that flying squirrel species in North America, when you put a black light over them, have this kind of strange glow about them. And you can see some photos here that people took of some squirrels by a nest box, and then one by a feeder, also exhibiting this unique morphological trait. And so the researchers, they were entomologists, they were studying insects, so they didn't delve too deeply into why this morphology might, this trait might be occurring, but it is possible that it has a function. So maybe it's something to do with their social behavior, if they're able to see these different colors, but it's also possible that it's just a trait that happens, but it doesn't serve any function. So this is something that there needs to be more research on this particular characteristic. The next ultra characteristic about flying squirrels are the fact that they give ultrasonic vocalizations. And so if you look here at this spectrum, humans' hearing is right here below 20 kilohertz in the acoustic range. But rodents, including flying squirrels, both northern and southern flying squirrels, have been shown to give these ultrasonic vocalizations. So Michelle Gilly in 2013 discovered this in the northern and southern flying squirrels and has documented it with colleagues since then. But at that point in time, we did not know if the Humboldt's flying squirrel gave these ultrasonic vocalizations. And so remember, they are a genetically distinct species. And so we wanted to explore whether they also give these ultrasonic calls similar to the northern and southern flying squirrel. So moving on to our research questions. To start, we asked the question, well, how can we survey this species? We wanted to come up with survey methods that were non-invasive, so ones that didn't involve having to trap the squirrels because they might get harmed in that process. And so we were interested in thinking about how we could survey for them without having to trap them. Remember that they are a somewhat elusive species since they are nocturnal. And so we had to come up with a way that we could survey them without actually being out in the forest looking for them ourselves. And then we were also, as I mentioned, really interested in understanding whether they give these ultrasonic vocalizations. And then once we've figured out a good way that we can survey them and detect the species, we wanted to see if there were any differences in their presence in forests that were old growth versus second growth, as these different forest types provide different resources for the species, and they might do better in old growth than in second growth. So for the survey methods, we looked to the literature and found that camera traps can be used for squirrel species to detect them. And so the way a camera trap works, this is an example here of the brand we use. You essentially set it up, and in our case, we set it up on a tree about 3 meters up. So this is me on an extendable ladder, putting up a camera. And so we put it on the tree, and then on an adjacent tree, we put a block of peanut butter suet, and we nailed it to that tree as bait, so that if there was a flying squirrel moving through the area, it would be attracted to that spot, and then hopefully we'd get a photo. To record the possibility of them giving ultrasonic vocalizations, we used ultrasonic recorders, which were originally developed for bats. And so that was also placed either on the tree where the camera was or an adjacent tree, along with a microphone. And so the study was done in several places. And so I mentioned before, we were interested in whether they differ in their habitat use in old growth and second growth. So we had study areas both in Headwaters Forest Reserve and Arcata Community Forest. So if I zoom in here to the Headwaters Forest Reserve, perhaps you've visited this area. There's a public trail in the northern part of the reserve. We did our research in the southern portion, which doesn't have public access, so there's not much human traffic here. And if you squint, you can see that this area here looks a bit different than the surrounding area, as it is a patch of old growth. And then over here is a patch of second growth. And so these are areas that were logged in the early 1990s, prior to the area becoming a reserve in 1999. And then our second study area was the Arcata Community Forest, which you may have visited. And this area is quite different in the sense that it has a lot of human traffic. And so a lot of people visit this area for hiking, biking. There are dogs, there are horses, other things, lots of activity. And this, the community forest was at one point completely logged. And so all of the stands in this area are second growth, and it was established in 1955. And so it's also been logged since then. So it has a variety of stands that have been clear cut or thinned in different periods of time since then. And so we did our surveys at multiple sites across these three areas, and we use both the detection methods, the cameras, as well as the recorders. I'm going to jump right into the results. So we found that they do indeed give ultrasonic vocalizations, and that they give these different types of vocalizations. So this red line right here indicates that 20 kilohertz, showing that these calls are mostly above that, and so are in the ultrasonic. So normally you wouldn't be able to hear these if I played them to you, but you can time expand these calls, and that will allow you to hear the idea of what they might call, but they're pretty much being like kind of slowed down. So I'm going to play the trill, which is kind of the most interesting of the calls. And note that if you have your volume up really high, you might want to be ready to turn it down in case it's a little too loud. So as I said, we've lengthened that out. That call would happen a lot faster, and it would be at a frequency we would normally be able to hear. But very interesting that that they have all these different calls. And my graduate student, Travis Farwell, who did his when he was an undergraduate at HSU, or Cal Poly rather, he did his honors thesis, and he's now finishing up his master's degree looking at the variation of these calls, both in squirrels here in Humboldt County, but also he had the chance to record some down in San Bernardino as well. So when we looked at the cameras, they were an excellent method to detect this squirrels. In fact, in some of the sites in headwaters where we're pretty sure that they've never encountered peanut butter suet bait, we got them on camera the day that we set it up. So we would set it up during the day, and then that night we would get a squirrel. And so they were pretty we were pretty pleased with that method in being able to detect the species. And we then use that method to look at their habitat use. Now, these squirrels aren't marked, and so it is possible that we would get one squirrel on one camera and that it would travel to another one. So we're not able to actually count the number of squirrels in the area, but we're able to say, look at the number of sites where we got squirrels, and that can give us an indication of potential proxy for the abundance in the area. And so the graph I'm going to show you are the percent of sites that we detected squirrels with the cameras. And so here we have the data for the Headwaters Forest Reserve in old growth, the Headwaters Forest Reserve for second growth, and then the Arcata Community Forest, which represents second growth as well. And so you can see pretty clearly that the old growth, almost 90% of the sites we detected flying squirrels, whereas they were a little bit lower for the second growth. So what this data suggests is that they might be in higher densities in the old growth. And so that might be because of the resources that are available. Perhaps there are a higher diversity of fungi species for them to eat, or other characteristics such as old growth trees being better for nesting. However, importantly, they are found in these second growth areas. And so it suggests that even though they may prefer this old growth, they still can do okay in the second growth, which is good to know. So along with the flying squirrels that we detected with our cameras, we had other species that we also detected, and sometimes were not so great from the perspective of trying to detect flying squirrels because they would take the bait. And that were bears, as you can see here. These are from Headwaters Forest Reserve, and then a fisher taking bait here in Headwaters as well. And so it is important to note, however, that even when the bait was removed, we still got flying squirrels. We think that the scent remained on the nails in the tree enough to attract them to that area. So these were in Headwaters. We had a little bit of a different species composition in the Arcata Community Forest. And you'll see that we changed our tactic and put the bait in these little bait cages to decrease the chance of them being taken. That said, if a bear had tried to take one of these, it would have no problem doing that. But luckily, at least in the time period that we were studying in the Arcata Community Forest, we only had these mammals and no bears. And so you can see foxes and fisher. And I'd like to point out that this fisher, this site right here, was right off a trail, and this was at 10:37 a.m. And so it's just fascinating to think that as you're walking through the community forest, these fisher are likely there. You probably won't see one because it'll hear you coming first and probably hide, but it's pretty cool to see that they're out there. And then this other series of photos, I just want to point out that there was one instance where the bait was completely taken, and it was by this one raccoon, which within is about 40 minutes here, meticulously pulled out all the bait, one little morsel after another, and ate the entire thing. I don't know if it had a good digestive day after that, but it was the only time that the bait was completely removed, and it was kind of funny to see it eating all the bait, one piece after another. So why should we be studying Humboldt's flying squirrel? So now we have these methods that we can use to detect them. Why are they important to study? Well, I've shared with you some of their unique biology and unique characteristics, which are interesting just for science sake, but they're also important to the ecosystem. I mentioned the fact that they eat fungi and they spread those mycorrhizae around, but they're also, unfortunately for them, prey for a variety of other species, including those of conservation concern. So they are eaten by northern spotted owls, which are threatened species, as well as fisher, and by coastal martens. And so this is where I'm going to transition over so that you can learn more about the martens from Micaela. And so I am going to stop my sharing so that Micaela can start her sharing.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Yeah, I don't want to disrupt the flow of the talk too much, but I will share, but I can't really start without saying a few words. First okay, that worked. You can see my screen. Okay, so first to thank you all for coming and thank our hosts, Julie and Melinda, for inviting us here tonight. And thanks to Barbara for joining me in this story. You'll notice my preview for my section of the talk is that it's going to follow very similar to Barbara's. So what we discovered as we've been talking as colleagues for the past 10 years is that these little critters, you wouldn't think a squirrel and a marten have similarities. But when we thought about putting together this story, this talk for the community, we realized there were a lot of similarities, not necessarily in the ecology. So although marten will also eat fungi, but they will also eat flying squirrels. So sorry to Barbara and all the squirrel lovers out there. But that Barbara and I have been interested to study elusive critters of the forest, as well as practicing non-invasive techniques to study these elusive critters. And I really think that's a nice story to highlight for the community and for all of the students here as well, because we don't understand a lot of what's going on with these critters. And also, we don't have to catch them necessarily to get some of those answers. And Barbara and I use some of the same tools for studying what are pretty different animals. So I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so sharing some stories about the research that my students and I have done on the Humboldt marten. And I love even that Barbara talked about Humboldt's flying squirrels, and I've got a Humboldt marten. I mean, it was just strange how many similarities there were in our species, in our talks, when really they're not very similar at all. So I also want to emphasize, as Barbara did, that this work, I'm presenting it on behalf of many people who have conducted this work. And I'm just kind of summarizing some of the stuff that people in my lab have worked on and some of my collaborators have worked on. And I'll highlight as best I can, who has sort of collected data for those things. And I also want to point out that for the most part, most of the photographs, including this one here, are taken from some of our camera studies. So like Barbara, I have used remote cameras. Many of us are using this new technology, it's not so new anymore, of remote cameras to look at elusive forest critters. And when I look at this picture, I just always also want you to think about, as I know you'll ask me, and I talk to people about, and I was talking to Barbara about this, about the Humboldt marten, whether they're nocturnal or diurnal, and we get them on camera at all different times of the day. So this is a daytime picture with a bit of snow, and that's going to become kind of relevant as I talk a little bit more about the Humboldt marten, because they're forest specialists, as I have here on the slide, but also kind of high elevation specialists. So maybe I should start with my first point. They are a member of the weasel family. And for those of you who know a little bit more about weasels, they're also the mustelid family, or Mustelidae. And so they're related to weasels, of course, but also the fishers, river otters, even wolverines, right? They're all part of the mustelid or weasel family. What's interesting, one of the things that's interesting then about the Humboldt marten, firstly, you might find them in the literature or on the US Fish and Wildlife Service page, also listed as the coastal marten. And I'm going to show you a map about why that is, but those are synonymous. I'm going to call them Humboldt marten. US Fish and Wildlife Service recently listed them as federally threatened species, and they're called the coastal marten. And they're distinguishing them because, as Barbara's squirrels, it's kind of only recently that they've been discovered, so to speak, as their own subspecies of the Pacific marten. So it used to be that all the marten in the US were American marten, and there were 14 subspecies. In the 2000s, they split the martens into Pacific and American. Actually, I'll show you a map in the next slide. Maybe I should just go to the next slide so we can look. Whoops. Let's play with our, here we go. We got it all under control. So we've got the American marten, which really, and again, Barbara, look, I mean, I'm thinking about the squirrels, right? So we've got this large range of like the northern flying squirrels of our American, the American marten across the northern parts of North America. And then we had the Pacific marten here, sort of in that Pacific Northwest. And so, but of course, going into the Mountain West as well. So it turned out that there was a subpopulation here on the coast of Oregon and California that was genetically distinct, not quite as genetically distinct as the Humboldt's flying squirrel. They are a subspecies of the Pacific marten, so not their own species, but they come with different adaptations, maybe different diets. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and apparently adapted to different habitats. So back to this picture is relevant because martens around the world. So we speak of the Humboldt marten, and you'll feel attached to them because they have Humboldt in their name. But actually, from my map, you can see that there are martens all over North America. There are pine martens all over Europe, and they're not all endangered. There are a small weasel that are snow adapted. They tend to live in higher elevations, which is also why people don't know a lot about them. And they are kind of thought to be snow adapted. They're very light, and so they can walk on top of the snow. They also are little, so they can walk under the snow in the subnivean zone, which is where their prey are in the winter. So they can choose to travel across the snow and not fall in, and they can dive under the snow and forage for little critters. So, oh, I forgot to mention, although this is a good place, that I wanted to wish you all a happy World Wildlife Day, because that's how this day came about for the museum. And I looked up a little bit of information on World Wildlife Day, and the theme this year is recovering key species for ecosystem restoration. And I thought that was a perfect theme for what Barbara and I were talking about today, because we're talking about redwood forest or Pacific Northwest forest. It's not all redwood, second growth redwood, lots of Doug firs, some pines, right? You guys are familiar with this forest. And so this brings me now to these Humboldt martens. So martens are all over the world in these high elevation areas. These coastal martens are coming down from the mountains. So while I do have this one picture of a marten in the snow, what's interesting about our coastal marten, or the Humboldt marten, is that they tend to live at lower elevations. In fact, there is a population of Humboldt marten on the Oregon coast that live in the dunes, in the dune forest. They're not living in a redwood forest. They're not living at high elevation. They're living at sea level in the dune forest along the Oregon coast. Now, don't ask me questions about them. I don't study them. They are absolutely mysterious to me. For this snow specialized high elevation weasel to then be hanging out at the dunes, we're going to talk a little bit about what competition they may have with other species and so forth. So just like Barbara's squirrels, now that we have a subspecies, we have a smaller, reduced population that's limited to sort of where we are in California up to parts of Oregon. And maybe, we don't have a really good handle on how many there are, maybe 200 to 400 Humboldt marten occur at all. So we're interested in understanding this species And you know, we can have discussions about, you know, how much we need to preserve this subspecies of marten, but it's really interesting that they've adapted. And so now we want to ask questions about how are they specialized. So when we think about why study the Humboldt marten, okay, I have to say it. I mean, they're really darn cute. That's never a good reason to study a species, but it does help when I talk about them to you because you're excited to see these nice critters. And what happens is they can be used as flagship species. Like in this logo here for the Wildlife Society North Coast chapter, they use the marten as part of their logo to indicate that they're interested in conservation and management of species. And that helps when you have a charismatic species. We can also call them an indicator species, which means that if you find marten in a forest, you know that you have a healthy forest ecosystem there. And so they can, if you don't find marten in the forest, maybe you worry that it's not such a good complex forest system that's supporting a lot of biodiversity. So that this is kind of like our vocabulary: indicator species, flagship species, and then they serve as an excellent umbrella species. And if you can imagine an umbrella, if we can protect the Humboldt marten and the habitat that they need, which looks like this. So this was a picture from our study area looking down, and we found lots of marten in this area, then we can protect forest for a lot of species, including Humboldt's flying squirrels and many of the other forest critters that live out in the forest. So they really are a great species to work with for these reasons. And then, of course, we're particularly interested in their unique morphology and behavior. It would be cool if they had a potassium, but they don't. So they do like to climb trees. They're excellent tree climbers. They are, I did mention in that slide, they're forest specialists. So I'll talk in a little bit about that, how they need large trees for cavities, for their dens and for resting. But it's interesting to us to think about what habitat these coastal marten prefer when compared to their Pacific marten cousins who have specialized in this high elevation. And then do they display different diet preferences that are, of course, going to be dictated by the prey that are available in these different habitats? So the cool thing about a marten is that they're kind of generalist predators. They eat a lot of different things. In fact, that could be my next slide. Oh, I've got survey methods. Like Barbara, I've got results a little bit later, but they eat a lot of different things. And so what are they eating in the areas where they've now are living? Are they just eating what's available? So lots of carnivores might just eat their favorite prey in relation to what's available. Or are they still specializing in things like small rodents and definitely different types of squirrel species? And what are they eating when they're together in competition with fishers and when they're on their own? So one thought about the Oregon coast population is that they've moved out of the forest to get out of competition with fishers, and they're eating totally different things out on the coast. And we're still in the process. You're getting information that's sort of hot off the press. We're still in the middle of a diet study to really get more information, but I'll talk to you about what we know already. And again, I'd like to point out, this is one of the beautiful martens that we photographed up in around Gasky in the Six Rivers National Forest. And I want to talk to you now about that study. So we also used remote cameras. So this is the kind that we used. I've got some good helpers. That's my son helping to put out some cameras. My collaborator, Keith Slauson, who, if you've heard about marten in Humboldt, you've heard about Keith Slauson, was working for the U.S. Forest Service, now working for California Parks, helped us to work on designing a survey for these Humboldt martens. And I think I'm going to give away the punchline sooner rather than later, but we went to survey. This was with my student, Holly Gamblin. Actually, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service approached me offered me some money, lucky me, to go survey for these marten, to survey for marten and fisher in the area. And I said, you know, I was talking with Keith and we were interested because there was a population, there were some marten sightings in Six Rivers National Forests in part of the EPA extant population area for marten, good habitat for marten, but a population that had never been studied before. And we went out to look for them in Six Rivers National Forest near Gasky, and we found martens at about 50% of our sites, kind of like Barbara's flying squirrels. And we saw multiple individuals and a mother and her kits. So we knew that it was a breeding population. So it was really exciting for us. You know, it was like a new discovery for the population of marten, and we're able to boost the numbers. But like Barbara said, we can't tell individuals apart. We sure are trying by those throat patches, but it's difficult. We can't tell them apart with cameras. So we're trying some other methods. So first, let me just add that we also use traditionally in the forest, these track plates. If you've never heard of them, they used to be big wooden boxes. Lately, they are made out of corrugated plastic. You put an aluminum, I had some Humboldt students out at the dunes, so this was a different project, but we put out a aluminum plate that you cover with carbon powder, a white sheet of contact paper, and you put some bait here, and then the animal walks across the soot, leaves its little footprints, and here you can see, I know you can tell, the footprint of a marten up in Gasky in 2017. So we took photographs, we took tracks, and probably, oh, I'm going to skip ahead because I want to tell you this story. More importantly, we were interested to find out how many marten there are out there. And in order to do that, you have to be able to identify them. We were keen to find a non-invasive way to do this. And many of you are probably familiar with the option to collect DNA samples, be able to identify individuals from hair. So you might have heard this from your CSI. If you pull out a hair and you have a hair follicle, you can get DNA from it. So these are photos from our Six Rivers study, and you can see a few different designs that we've tried. We tried wrapping around the tree with some, they're called gun brushes. They're little wire brushes, basically like a hair brush. And here it's in a 3-part. So what happens is if you put it like this at the bottom of the tree, put some chicken legs as bait, the martens, who's photographing very nicely here, will walk around it and eat it without brushing up against it. So we tried making it a little bit more elaborate, and you can see that it's really a non-invasive method. This animal just walks by the brush, it gets a little hair pulled, and it gets its chicken reward. This is just a photo so you can see how it works. This is a bear. So I also do hair snares for bears in California, as the introduction mentioned, one of my students. This is just a piece of barbed wire. You put some delicious bait back here for a bear. It'll crawl under the barbed wire and it'll leave a little tuft of hair, just like that. And then you bring it back into the lab, you snip off the hair follicles, and you can get DNA. And we're currently, my other graduate student, Stefan Peterson, is trying to do a complete mark recapture analysis for black bears in Modoc County. So it's a really great non-invasive tool. And just to show you how we've adapted, I'm going to show you some interference that we've had. We've adapted these open hair snares to a tube snare because we were getting a lot of interference by other animals. And here we have a little brush with a tube with bait in it. And now it's marten sized. So the marten just goes in, it rubs its back up against the brush, pulls a few hairs. In fact, we've modified it again, but I didn't have a picture for you. This is now a piece of wood, a dowel with a little glue stick on it, with a little piece of, not a glue stick, but a strip of glue paper. And so it pulls the hairs out a little bit better. So that's been a really important tool for us to be able to use with technology, to be able to identify martens in the field and get population estimates. So back to this picture, I mentioned that our marten are forest specialists, and similar to Barbara's squirrels, it's thought that they need, if not old growth forests, very old forests with large trees for these cavities that they're dependent on. So one thought about the populations being so low is that they were limited by the number of cavities that they have. So I had another student, Matt Delheimer, a few years back, who built these rest boxes out of reclaimed redwood, carried them on his back, they were 40 pounds each, into the forest, climbed up those ladders like Barbara, and set them up in trees to see if martens would use them. Put cameras on them, and sure enough, martens came to investigate And we found out later, even use these boxes. We even had a female use it as her natal den. So she gave birth to kits in one of these boxes. We had flying squirrels visit. And of course, Fisher came to check it out. Again, you make them, they were built with tiny little holes that only the martens could get in. Well, sure, the squirrels could get in, but that wouldn't have been a good idea, because if a marten went in after them, that probably wasn't a very safe place. But the Fishers could not get in because the holes were smaller. So now this work was done not in Six Rivers, but on Green Diamond property just north of Arcata, Blue Lake in the Cornell area. And the Green Diamond has continued to put out these rest boxes for the martens to see if we can expand suitable habitat for the marten by using these rest boxes. So that was really some exciting work. So again, kind of emphasizing some old technology like track plates and building wooden boxes to make animals happy, and some new technology like remote cameras, DNA analysis from hair, so that we can get as much information as we can from these animals without ever having to trap them. Not that trapping animals and putting collars on them can't be super useful, right? We can get a lot of information from animals doing that, but let's gather as much as we can without putting their lives in danger with those captures. So here's some of that interference. So just like Barbara experienced, maybe the raccoons were pesky, we had a lot of bears come. They threw our track plates down the hills. They ate our bait. They pulled down. Here's another modified hair snare. We really wanted to get the martens to not walk above the tree, above the hair snare. So we modified them yet again, and the bears just ripped these off the tree in order to get to the bait. So you have to recognize when you're working with these forest critters, hence this new modified version that's actually wired to the tree so that there isn't going to be as much interference from critters like bears, moms who bring their cubs around. Hey kids, there is chicken for dinner tonight at this tree. Oh, don't worry, they'll bring some more next week, right? So we definitely had to have, we went to go and rebait the, you can see that she's pulled off the bait and the cover here. They also liked to check out our boxes. So here we have some curious bears, seeing if anybody, hopefully not one of those flying squirrels living in the box at the time. These remote cameras can make our jobs very entertaining. But what did we find? Well, I'm going to summarize some of Holly's work. This is like a super summary, which is that first, we really wanted to try and understand the extent of the marten population in the region. So we weren't even sure there were martens living up there. They had just been sighted once or twice. And so she was able to find pretty good detections of the marten in the area. And like I said, you know, it's a pretty complex ecosystem, very difficult terrain to get through. She and her team could only check sometimes 3 cameras in a day because it took them hours to hike to them, and it was very tricky. And so in this very beautiful, complex area, she found that you were more likely to find a marten on the camera in areas that had large trees. They were more complex, close to streams, and she found particularly at low elevations. And you see, this is when we're starting to understand that the Humboldt marten really has evolved from their Pacific marten cousins, right? So they're not as specialized to these high elevation areas. So how might that affect their diet? Oh, so what was so exciting is once you start getting into marten research, you can collaborate with all the other marten people. And so Holly and I were able to contribute our data to a very large marten study that just came out last year that said that Humboldt marten in California and Oregon, so they were looking at all the studied populations of marten, they were associated with increased shrub cover. So you can imagine that would be good habitat for a little carnivore to hide, as well as to find tasty treats. Mass producing trees like tan oak might attract prey like squirrels. Areas with pine, total basal area means larger trees or more trees, more precipitation, varying amounts of canopy cover, cooler August temperatures, but not the old growth structural indices that they used to be associated with, that the Pacific martens are associated with, right? So we're finding that there's a move away. So what do we want to know? There's limited information on studies of rare species because, as we've explained, they can be difficult to study. And so we need more replication. So these folks on this Moriarty paper, these collaborators, we are all now spreading out and doing a deeper dive into Humboldt marten habitat and space use in Northern California and Southern Oregon. So I'm working with folks in the California area, and Katie Moriarty's working with folks in the Oregon area, and we're trying to understand more about the Humboldt marten. And I've got a couple of graduate students who are working on these projects, looking at various aspects of marten space utilization, habitat selection, and of course, diet. So we get to some of the diet answers. Well, these sciurids, or different squirrel species, this was actually an older study. I mean, it's not an old study, it's from like 2016, older data that we've collected more data. I'm going to talk about that too. So the chipmunks are the #1 prey of our Humboldt marten, which suggests that they're hanging out during the day, right? And yet they like the flying squirrels too, which suggests that they're going out and hunting at night. So they're really confusing us, right? So you can put a collar on a marten and you can get some better ideas of their activity and their movements, right? Movements I can't get very well with my cameras, although I can get activity, pictures during the day, pictures at night. They also like those Doug squirrels, but they are dietary generalists, as I mentioned, and they do eat voles, hares, birds, and berries. So they're not as strictly carnivorous as some of the other mustelid species. And what I wanted to mention is that these older study was done going out and looking very hard in the forest for a few marten scat. And we're not very good at finding a tiny little marten scat in a really big forest. So I've got a picture here of this beautiful dog, and we have requested the help of these dogs, scat sniffing dogs, conservation heroes, to go out into the forests and find, locate, detect for us marten scat. In fact, I've been working with Katie Moriarty and colleagues, and we're actually collecting everybody's scat out there, martens and fishers and bobcats and mountain lions and coyotes, and we want to see what everybody's eating in these different ranges. And so that's the stuff that we're working on right now. Just got an email today about some scats going off to the lab for meta-analysis. So now these squirrel studies are picking through, washing scats. I've done this for a lot of different species. I had grad students do this with river otters. You wash the scat literally in a washing machine. You dry it and you pick it apart and you look for what's in it. Now I can send a scat to the lab and they will check for the DNA of every prey item. And so I don't have to go through with a microscope and forceps, and it's a lot more efficient. It's also a lot more expensive, but it's okay. We have some people who are interested to support this. So what are some of their challenges? Well, these are terrible photos, but I put them because they're photos that we got on our marten study. So I could have pulled one off of the web, but this is a fisher taking our bait. You can see the hair snare over here, taking the bait and running off. So there's a bit of competition for bait, but there's competition between fishers and martens throughout their range. In fact, a really interesting paper just came out looking at the competition between fisher and marten, if you're interested. And then they have competition with bobcat. These 3 species, I didn't put a marten here, I should have, fisher and bobcat, are eating a lot of the same prey items. In addition, these bobcats are known to eat fisher, prey on them, predate them, as they do martens. And so they're a competitor and a predator. So one of my graduate students, I saw that she was here tonight, Erica Anderson, she's going to be looking at the relationships between martens and fisher and bobcat. And my other student, Alyssa, is going to be looking at the diet overlap of these species to see if they're separating themselves. So we've got a lot of interesting work going on. So like Barbara, I figured we would wrap up here with a few non-target species. It's really interesting when you put little pieces of food in the forest, and you'll ask different people, what does your species come to, right? So Barbara puts out peanut butter and she gets all the same species as I get when I put out chicken legs, right? So it's really interesting. So we got flying squirrels coming to check out our chicken legs. Maybe leaving a little hair sample. I don't know. I showed you lots of bears, but I also wanted to show you that we get some other elusive critters. And if we had another time, we should get somebody to talk about spotted skunks because they are amazing. You'll find one at the Sequoia Park Zoo. Hanging out. I'm going to go visit Boo at the zoo. That's her name. We look at these beautiful gray foxes. They visited our place a lot. They visited a lot. We also had some deer, turkey vultures coming for a bit of chicken. And some ringtails, right? Some lesser known creatures of the forest. This little ringtail, if you hadn't heard about, is a relative of the raccoon, and they live in our forests. We have an actual weasel, a long-tailed weasel, looks a lot like our marten, is even a little bit smaller. And this is one of those terrible pictures, but exciting ones that you get. This is a mountain lion walking by from the picture, from the camera to the behind the bear to our hair snare site where the chicken is. So we really, and then I just put this guy because he was having a good old roll here in front of our camera. We got a lot of animals visiting, and what I love about these projects is I've then had students do work on these non-target species because they tell us a lot about who else is in the ecosystem. So we can use these non-target species to tell us about the competition and who's visiting. We know that gray foxes may have competition with martens and fishers as well because they're so numerous. They occur at much higher densities than our little Humboldt martens. So have we made progress? I think we're making progress. And I put this one back on because this is like a tear jerk worthy photograph where we got the mother and her kits visiting the photo. And that was a huge deal to us because we weren't just getting, we can't identify these individuals. So we weren't just getting males moving through or the same individual visiting all of our cameras. We actually had a breeding female come and visit several times with her kits. It's a little bit hard to judge, but we think the mom and her two kits. There may have been a third kit, but again, it's hard. And this again, during the day, 1 p.m., right? So it's really interesting to see how much information you can get on activity. I should mention, there are great seasonal patterns. We see females and their kits more active during the day. Maybe they're avoiding predation and competition with their nocturnal competitors and predators. We see that for fisher as well. We also see seasonal variation in diet. I say that marten eat berries. Well, they're eating berries when there are lots of berries around, like every other forest critter does. They don't prefer berries, but in the summer and the end of summer, it's a great energy-rich resources. You'll find everybody eating berries during that time. So they're going to have seasonal changes, just like they eat chipmunks in the summer, and then I didn't mention really birds. They're eating birds in the winter, right? So there are going to be some of these differences that we can discover as we do all of these studies. And I think the other thing I've enjoyed so much about getting into the marten world is this ability to collaborate with other researchers. It's a really collaborative group of people. And so hopefully you can hear some more talks about different marten projects going on in the region. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. This acknowledgement slide is for both Barbara's work and mine. We both had so many students in the field helping us, or I joke with my students that I help them, right? So they're doing a lion's share of the work. And what I also love is that there are graduate students and undergraduate students that get to be involved in this research. And we both have had a series of excellent graduate students and undergraduates who have been involved in this research. We've been funded. Sequoia Park Zoo has offered funding for us, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, Save the Redwoods League. So nonprofits, local nonprofits who are interested to see work getting done in these forests. And of course, Cal Poly Humboldt has supported us in our work a lot. They support our grad students. They support a lot of the equipment, lots of the cameras we put out. Our stockroom manager helped Matt, my grad student, build some of those boxes, right? So that's like it takes a village to get this work done. And I'm so grateful for all of the students here, some of my alums who've worked on these projects, and some students, future students who's going to be working on my project this summer, maybe. So thanks to you. And with that, our last slide is if you have any questions for us. I've not been looking at the chat at all, so I could pull that up. And Barbara and I decided that we would answer questions in the chat after the talk. So I'm not sure, Barbara, if we just want to go in order. I don't know how far back to go. Oh, here we go. Okay. So thank you. There's no big applause.
I know, right? Thank you.
Okay, I'll stop sharing so that we can see each other. And I'll just go up and see. Let's see. I love that Sylvia's watching with the kids. Hi, Kaylee. Destiny. Destiny, are you there with Holly? I see you're watching with another alum. Might be Holly. Okay. Okay. Robert asks, how much does it cost to run one scat sample? So I just delivered a batch of scat. It's like $40 a sample to do that meta barcoding. I have to check my budget. I think it's about $40 a sample. And Melinda asks if I think that Martens might live in a healthy second growth forest in Neyland. So that's a great question. So I have had several reports from local folks that say, I think I had a Marten in my yard, and they send me a picture. And sorry, I'm just shutting down this talk. So, okay. And then it's a fisher. So do I think they could? I do think they could. So these guys are proving to be rather adaptable critters, but I haven't heard any reports of them this far south, so to speak, in Neyland, but I wouldn't be surprised if you got one. So when I say this far south, that's a little bit of a misnomer. They occur east of here. And in fact, the Green Diamond area that Matt worked in 2014, 16, has been given over to the Yurok tribe. And we're with my other collaborator, Sean Matthews, we're doing some work there on the Martens now with the hair snares with the Yurok. And that's been a really exciting collaboration. And they are actually pretty far south, but they're also further east than here. So they're coastal Martens, but they're closer to Willow Creek. And a little bit really dense forest there. Okay, so Tony, it's good to see you. You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, Barbara, Whitney asks, how can they get involved? I can also answer.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, for myself, the Flying Squirrel project, we're not doing anything specific right at the moment. But when there are opportunities, I definitely mention it to students and post things. Yeah, and so of course, a lot of that work was also done pre-COVID, so it was a little bit easier to get lots of people involved and all carpool. And I'm excited as things are, fingers crossed, hopefully improving as we move through this pandemic, that we'll also be able to do sort of have larger groups of students come into the field and be safe.
And I would reiterate the same. So generally for our undergrads, we will post opportunities to work with us and our graduate students mostly. We post them around the wildlife building. We'll also post them on Handshake. And Barbara and I will be hosting is a funny word, but searching for student interns for this summer to work on a couple of different projects, and that advertisement will go out through the email, and it will be posted on Handshake. So when we used to be able, like you saw the crowd, Barbara's crowd, right? We used to take like 4 or 6 students, and now we can only take 1 or 2. So we're a little bit limited to that. But as Barbara said, hopefully we'll be able to get more. Okay, so through the DNA scat analysis, can you determine population and community dynamics by changes in diet? Now that's a lot. See, now you're talking about all my stuff, right? Cameras, hair, diet. Can we determine community dynamics by changes in diet? So now are you talking, so I don't know if Joshua wants, are you talking community like fisher, marten, bobcat community through diet? I guess we're gonna try. That's my answer. Yeah, Josh is gonna talk.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering about the carnivore and whether it be predator scavenger dynamics, and with maybe marten in the area, if that affects the others, or if maybe bobcats in the area, or say don't have their chipmunks in the area, how do they compensate through their diets and whatnot? Would you be able to tell all of that through the diet DNA analysis?
Yeah, so that's super ambitious, but we're going to try to get at a little bit of that. So I hear what you're saying, right? Like, so are marten eating different things maybe when the fisher and bobcat aren't around? So can we look at, that's a little bit harder to get at. How do you know that fisher and bobcat maybe aren't around? So I think I shouldn't really be too flippant and say, oh yeah, we can say everything about community dynamics through their diet. We will be a little bit more limited than that. But what I didn't actually mention is the next step is to actually look at the prey availability. So I've got two grad students who've been working on looking at what little small critters are in the area to see how that compares with what martens like to eat, and then maybe eventually with what fisher and bobcat like to eat. So we're trying to answer those questions, Josh, but we don't really have probably enough scat to do it as nicely as you have designed in your head. I don't think we'll be able to do it quite so elegantly. Okay, yay, Destiny. I hope to hear your voice again soon too. Holly wasn't able to attend. She'll watch the recording. Okay. So this is for you, Julie. Is there a place where the photos and the PowerPoint are posted? Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, I guess there'll be a recording of the talk.
There'll certainly be a recording, and if we want to share a PDF of a PowerPoint, we could certainly link that to our website as well.
Yeah, I guess we'll talk to Barbara about that. I mean, they're just maybe not. I don't know. We'll have to see. It's in it. I guess it's in the recording, but most of these, Barbara and I dig into our archives of these photos, and so we like to use them for our talks, but they don't go much further. Although Holly will have published some pictures of her kits in the paper coming, because again, it's really exciting. So some of those photographs will get published.
We're glad everyone was here to see them tonight.
Yeah.
Unique opportunity.
Tony asks, flying squirrels, Barbara, do you think the UV Florence, Tony, fluorescence? I'm not sure the question.
Yeah, so I accidentally sent it early.
Yeah.
I retyped the question later on in the chat.
Oh, okay. Let me skip ahead. Okay, Barbara.
Yeah, I think I saw there were several questions about the UV. One from Nicholas asking if there are plans to investigate it, and then Tony's question about what it might be due to, and then there was another one from Emily asking if it might have something to do, or can it affect the predation risk from raptors. So to answer all of those, I don't have any specific plans. And I'm also not sure about what of the physical characteristics. I don't think it's the dandruff. I think it would be something more specific to like the morphology of the hair. And for Emily, yeah, it'd be really interesting to know if there are other species that can see those aspects, and because you would think it would make the squirrel very susceptible to being taken down by an owl or something like that. It has good eyesight. So I don't have any specific plans, but I'm sure that that someone is going to be investigating it, and then maybe perhaps that could be something if any of you are interested to go get your master's or do a project on that to investigate it further, because it is definitely something quite interesting. And then I also saw that there was a question from Shalom asking about the population in San Bernardino. So no, my graduate student Travis Farwell did not discover the flying squirrels down there, but he was able to, actually it was kind of unique. He was able to find sites to work with to get recordings by using iNaturalist, because people had posted the San Bernardino flying squirrel coming to bird feeders. And so he actually worked with people that he contacted with through iNaturalist to be able to put the recorders out on their back porches. So that was a convenient way to quickly be able to record the flying squirrels. And he was able to get a lot of data. There were a lot of people that were really excited to help. Yeah, I think Travis is here. Yeah, saying that's very convenient field work.
I was going to say Travis is here answering questions. That's a good one. That was really exciting and very good work on Travis's part. Nice to see you, Travis. Right, so there are some more interest in the pictures. So we don't generally publicize these photos in particular, like I can think for the marten. We don't share locations of where the martens are. They're a sensitive species, and so we like to share them for these talks, but we don't really do a lot of posting of these types of photos on social media, just out of respect for our funders and our collaborators, and out of respect for the wildlife, to kind of say, I don't know, you've heard like eBird when there's like, hey, there's an owl here, and then like 300 people go and visit that owl where it is, you know, it can be disturbing. So we don't do a lot of social media posts saying, hey, we found martens at this spot. I could tell you that you can go check out Six Rivers, and, you know, good luck walking through there. If you find a marten, that would be great, because it's really tough terrain. Actually, when Holly was out there, she and her crew did see an actual marten in person, which was very exciting. But Emily asks if the DNA from the scat can also be extracted to identify individual martens. And yes, absolutely. So we can identify the new thing. It's kind of old hat to say, just like you said, DNA can be extracted from river otter spraint. And I had graduate students doing that. And we counted and did a population assessment for river otters at Humboldt County. Kristen Bresky did that work a few years back. And we can do that for our Humboldt marten. And so it's interesting, the genetic analysis for the diet is a more recent discovery, to be able to use the scat to be actually able to see what they're eating, right? Where it used to be that you just took the DNA from outside the scat to see who the individual was. And we can also do that with these scats. The reason we're doing it with hair is because it's easier to collect in a way. I can't find marten scat very much. And so we actually go out and we use the dogs, as I mentioned. But and Erica will also, who's here, take note. Interestingly, they have put some hair snares out for marten, and marten are leaving their scat at these locations, which is really exciting. So yes, of course, if we can identify those individuals by scat as well, it's actually not too different than getting it from the hair. There are some few extra steps because you're not using tissue. You got to work a little harder to extract it from the scat. But we have done that for a lot of different species. I'm definitely famous pooper scooper of my family. Done a lot of those DNA scat studies for a lot of different species. So it's pretty cool. So thanks for bringing that up, Emily. Okay, so I'm being respectful of your time. I can see there were a lot of people, so if you have to sneak off, that's fine. But I think Barbara and I are going to stay for a few more minutes to answer some questions. Barbara, over to you.
Yeah, Shalom asks, is that how they distinguished it from other species? And I'm maybe there was a different question ahead of that, so I'm not quite sure if what that is in reference to exactly. I don't know if Shalom's still here.
I guess I just missed the part where you were talking about how that like population down there was discovered, like how they figured out that was actually a Humboldt blind squirrel versus, you know, the other ones like down in that small population.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the study done in 2017 was doing genetic work looking at Humboldt's flying squirrel. Well, the then not known Humboldt's flying squirrel, but the populations compared to the northern flying squirrel and the southern flying squirrel. And then actually more recently, and you can access this on the Cal Poly library page, there was a biology grad student, Stella Yon, that did some genetic work comparing the San Bernardino and the Humboldt's flying squirrels found up here in Humboldt and other areas in California. And she actually found that they're quite genetically distinct, and that I don't remember all the details, but if you look at her thesis, that they have been separated for quite some time. And so I don't know, you know, if there's movement towards suggesting that they're a different species, but you could argue that they're a different subspecies than the ones that we have up here. And then part of Travis's work is also looking at how their vocalizations might be different. And so he's working on looking at the acoustic properties of the different ultrasonic vocalizations to see if they actually differ, which might also suggest, you know, behavioral differences between the two populations. And kind of interestingly, so there was a population in the San Jacinto Mountains as well, and they have since gone extinct. And so there really is just this like small remaining population. Whether or not they should be, you know, listed, they were petitioned to be listed in 2011, but that was back when they were part of this larger, they were thought to be part of the larger northern flying squirrel. And so I'll be interested to see if there's going to be more interest, but they are stable. So it's not, even though they're a really small population and they're a small area, there is no evidence suggesting that they're declining rapidly. And then I think I saw another question from Joshua asking about if they're restricted to conifer trees or any large tree forest stand. And if you look at the species in North America, so including the southern and the northern, where there's more information, they occur in other types of forests, and they also, in some cases, will even nest in people's houses. And so if you actually look up like southern flying squirrel on just Google, you'll probably find most documents are like for pest removal. And so they are adaptable in that regard. There's a little less information on the Humboldt flying squirrel since it's a smaller range, but it doesn't seem like they are restricted. And, you know, based on my research, as I said, it seems like they do okay in second growth. And I didn't have time to mention this, but I also did a really small study in the Sequoia Park behind the zoo. And we did find one flying squirrel back there as well. And so that's a kind of what you would consider a forest fragment. You know, not really in an urban area, but I think that more research could be done to see if they can occur, like what size patches they would need to be able to persist. But they do need forests, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a conifer forest.
You've got a few more questions there at the end, at the bottom.
Oh yeah, so Destiny, can Humboldt's flying squirrels hybridize with northern flying squirrel? That's a really good question, and I'm kind of excited in a couple years when I have some time to get a grad student to work up in Washington. That so basically in Washington, northern Washington, and also I guess that would be southern British Columbia in Canada, to look at the area because they actually overlap in that area. And so if I had to hypothesize, I would think that they don't. And then I would be really interested to know how they're able to avoid each other. And so I've been collaborating with a flying squirrel researcher, Cordy Diggins, and she's really interested in looking at the different call types as well as the differences of these call types across the different species. And so it's possible that the differences might allow the species to recognize that it's a different species, and so have that enough behavioral difference that they wouldn't hybridize. But that's something I'm definitely excited to potentially to get into. Oh, and then Robert asks, what was the real time duration here? Actually, I can go back and look. So it was 230 milliseconds or 0.23 seconds for that trill call that I played.
Okay, those were some really excellent questions. What a great audience we've had. We're ready if anybody wants to speak out.
Yeah, I think I've looked. Sorry if I missed anybody's question.
Yeah, I don't know.
If we missed anything, someone can unmute and just say your question too. Everyone has the ability to unmute yourselves at this point.
Can I just say that I loved your talks. I loved all the pictures. I loved all the information that you gleaned from the studies. And I just thought it was amazing. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. I have to say, as we were chatting with Julie and Melinda as we were getting ready for tonight, and it's fun for Barbara and I to share this information with the community. And so we really took that opportunity to share some of the highlights. You can see that this is work that's been done over the past 5 and 10 years. So it's fun to be able to share with you what we found.
Yeah, I had a quick question about flying squirrels.
Yeah.
I was wondering if besides the mast trees, which I guess they're using for food, are they found in other large species forests other than conifer forests, or are they restricted to just those?
No, they can occur in other types of forests as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Micaela and Barbara. This was wonderful. Thank you everyone for attending here with us this evening. It was great to see so many of our community members, even if it is over this virtual format. It allowed for a larger room than we have physically, so that's one nice part. So again, thank you so much. I really appreciate your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to everybody. It's the same. It would have been nice to be in person, but it was really nice to be able to speak to so many of you over Zoom.
And this is the virtual round of applause now. Which
Yeah.
is always, you can't hear it, but it's there. I see it.
Thanks for sharing this time with us late on a Thursday night. It was really nice.
Yeah, and it was nice to see some alumni that are probably not here in Humboldt. So it was great that you were able to make it.
Exactly. Yeah. And really nice to have the community members who don't hear about this stuff. I mean, the students enjoy this, but I really like to share the information with the community so you can know who's living in your backyards. Just like the question was, do we have Martin and Neeland? I'm just waiting for them to show up. So yeah.
There are flying squirrels.
Flying squirrels.
Yeah, we already know we have flying squirrels. We have several camera traps, so we catch everything except porcupine and martin pretty much. So
have you seen ringtail? We were just chatting about whether
no, we haven't. We're at 2,800 feet or so.
Oh, you're pretty high. I was going to ask if you have badger too, but only if you have an open area up there.
We have open areas, and we thought maybe there'd be sign like big holes, but now we think maybe it's just other things digging.
Other things digging, yeah. It's such a beautiful area up there.
Yeah. So lots of wildlife, but not those other elusive critters. So we'll see.
Yeah, but you keep those cameras out and they'll show up one day and surprise you.
And the flying squirrels, unfortunately, have only been in the mouths of mesocarnivores. So we haven't really, seen any in the trees. But we're gonna put some of the Nick, a semi neighbor, and he's been encouraging us to put some of those caged platforms, what would you call them, in our trees to see if we can get flying squirrels.
Nice. Travis, they make great snacks.
So I just sent you an email about the plans for the rest box, and hoping you could send me the plans so I could build one, and we'll put one of our cameras on it and see what we get.
Okay. Yes, I can do that.
And share the results with you. So look in your email for me.
Thank you. I can send you those plans.
All right.
In fact, I will send them to you, but to everybody, they are publicly available because it is in Matt Delheimer's thesis. I took that picture from his thesis, which you can find on Humboldt Digital Scholar. But since you made the effort to email me, I will send you a PDF of that so you can have the plans. But some things are publicly available. Those of you who were asking for photographs, some of the photographs I've shared would be in Matt Delheimer's thesis, in Holly's thesis, and you can find those on digital, Humboldt Digital Scholar online. So we do try and make this stuff available for people.
I see Patty has a hand up.
Hi, Patty.
Hello. I was just wondering if you guys were talking about not being able to like identify the different squirrels or martens. And so I was wondering if you guys had any plans to put any tags on anybody or like tiny collars or something.
Yeah, if I was going to do a study where I needed to know the individual and I wanted to be able to detect them, you know, one method that you could use that you would have to catch the squirrel again because the numbers are kind of small. You can put little ear tags on their ears. Another method that you can use, and it also involves trapping them again, or at least getting them in a place where you can read them. You can put what are called pit tags that are very similar to what you might use for your cat or dog. And you basically inject them under their skin, and then you run a scanner over them, and it has a unique number pop up. I don't know, their fur is a little bit dark for this, but when I was working with ground squirrels and I wanted to identify individuals, I would actually use hair dye and paint number letter combinations on their sides when I was doing behavioral studies of ground squirrels. But I think it might be a little bit tricky with flying squirrels because their fur is a little bit darker. And that might be a little bit harder to see. And I wouldn't want
hair dye.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to put anything on them that would make them more visible to a
Right.
person too. So,
Right.
But those are some techniques that you might use to identify individuals in the field, at least for. And I'm assuming, do people use ear tags for martens at all?
So you could, you know, right now the hair and the scat are good methods, being non-invasive. If we're going to go to the effort to catch a marten and put a collar on, they do have little tiny collars for little tiny marten necks. And my collaborator, Katie Moriarty, and some of my students are helping. They have conducted a small marten collaring study, and Matt Delheimer was involved. Humboldt marten. They've done Pacific marten out in Lassen collaring studies. We don't use them for ID. So it's really interesting. We use them to track their movements. Of course, we know who they are, but it's not really worth catching them and then trying to recapture them on the camera to get a recapture, because actually we know exactly where that individual is. So if we're going to go to the trouble to mark an animal with a collar, we're really using it to get movement data more so than we are trying to identify it with like a little collar. But I hear what your question is, Patty. We are thinking about, we have in the past thought about, if you're capturing animals and not putting a radio collar, to put a little collar on them so you can recognize them later. But for now, we're using the hair and the scat to use their IDs. Yeah, more non-invasive. There's so few of the marten, we don't want to do too much trapping. Although the trapping that my collaborator has done, they are really excellent, and they've had great success with that.
That's cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So Destiny's asking about some marking substance with the hair snare. So I have certainly given that some thought with other species. We were trying to get creative to see if we could mark like pronghorns that maybe come into a feeding or water trough. There have been studies that have looked at marks that you can put on them that way. Of course, they would be temporary because these mammals are all shedding their fur. So it would be temporary and seasonal, but it could be possible. So again, it depends if you are trying to, if it's going to be easier or more feasible than, for example, the DNA from the scat. And then what Barbara said, right? You don't want to make any attractant to make them more visible to their predators. So that's something that we'd have to think about. But I love the creativity. I really love it when students are thinking a little bit outside the box in ways we can try and accomplish things non-invasively. I appreciate that. Thanks, Destiny.
All right. Well, thank you so much for staying on and answering these final questions and discussion. We so appreciate that.
So thanks, Julie. Thanks, Melinda. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Good night, everyone.
Yeah, good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Can I ask one more thing?
Sure.
So I'm a student and I would just love like if they have more either for either study opportunities to go out in the field, maybe to in addition to posting them, maybe letting like, you know, our department heads know about it to, you know, to email it in case we're interested or something like that.
Student in which department?
Like wildlife or zoology, things like
yeah.
that.
Yeah, so if we have those opportunities in wildlife for wildlife students, we'll send it out to all of the students.
Awesome, thank you.
Although I will say that I guess when it depends on the opportunity, it's true. Some of the grad students, you guys get a lot of emails, so we try not to send everything by email. So sometimes we, the grad students might just post for some help in the building, but I hear you, especially over when things were remote, no one was in the building, we had to communicate a little bit better that way. It's a good request. Thanks, Christina.